What I'd like to do is go back and start at the very beginning. We all know that you were born in New Zealand, but not a lot of Australians would know about the place that you were born in. It's not exactly a thriving metropolis. Otaki. What was it like growing up in a small little rural town like Otaki?
Well, I left when I was 6, I have to be honest.
Right.
And moved up the road to another thriving metropolis, which is Levin, which, let's be very fair, and I'm sure we'll get people who would disagree, but it's an absolute dump. And it was voted, I think, 3 or 4 years in a row, New Zealand's most boring town. So I don't sort of own up to being brought up in Levin, but Otaki was a lovely place because it was very much an important part of the Maori heritage. And, you know, they had the Maori church, which sadly burnt down a few years ago, but they've rebuilt it. And they had a very big pa in the middle of Otaki itself. And I always remember, you know, being invited in there on certain occasions. And sitting around and the singing was always wonderful. So I enjoyed my time, and my grandparents continue to live there, and quite a few relations lived there. So I think I spent more time there than Levin, thank God.
It's a beautiful part of the world.
It is. It's really very nice,
yeah,
yes.
It's lovely. Population, just as a matter of interest, I was doing a bit of research. It's still
it's
only
more
about,
than 3.
Well, it's only about 5,000 still, but
yeah.
It's, I guess, a small little glimpse into what is the beauty of New Zealand, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so sparsely populated and so green and beautiful.
Yeah, but when you say that, I think the thing about it is it's a bit like the cities in Australia, is the fact that it's not that far from Wellington. And, you know, they're creeping out from Wellington. I think it's going to eventually become almost a suburb.
Yeah.
And also there's a lot of holiday homes there, and a lot of Wellingtonians, you know, have holiday homes on the beaches and things. So when you say it's got a 5,000 population, it's a bit like some of the places like Port Douglas and Noosa and things. They haven't got that huge population,
Yeah.
but in the season,
Yep.
they are, you know, they expand, should we say.
You mentioned boredom. How did you get past that boredom?
I left home when I was 16. Moved to Wellington, to the Big Smoke.
The Big Smoke.
Big Smoke. I still go there a couple of times a year because my mother's still alive, and it's very funny because my wife has never been to Wellington when it's been windy, and we all know,
Yeah.
you know, its reputation as being the most revolting, windy, wet place. And of course, climate change has meant we've seen a change of that. But there's these iron bars that go around the corners, and she just laughs at me when I say that they are to stop little old ladies getting blown in front of the buses, which is an absolute true story. But you know, she doesn't believe me
Yeah.
because she has never ever been there on a wet day.
It's a beautiful city. That harbour
It
is
is.
fantastic.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It is. And also, you know, the food scene is very much alive and well in Wellington these days, and wonderful bars, and they are mad keen on coffee. They'd even rival, Melburnians, I think, when it comes to coffee.
Yeah, very cosmopolitan nowadays. Back in those days when you were in your teens, I mean, let's face it, when you're in your teens, cooking isn't cool. Did you get away from cooking, or have you always cooked?
No, well, I think the thing about it is you're quite right. I mean, there was no way I wanted to do home economics at school because I was interested in food. I think you may equate that as I was a guts, but you know, I liked food, and I was absolutely useless at banging nails into things like that. You know, so I had to do woodwork, which was hilarious. You should have seen the products of my times as a woodworker. They were just unbelievable. But I think the thing about it is it wasn't cool, but we did cook at home to a certain extent, in the sense that my father was a very keen gardener, so we all had to help, you know, in the tomato season to make my mother's tomato sauce and things like that. And at Christmas and Sundays, we always had to help prepare the vegetables. But I don't think you'd say that we were in the kitchen a lot. It was a different era, but you know, we still were brought up with food. It still was an important part of our heritage. My mother was a very good cook. My grandmother was a great cook. You know, so it was part of my heritage.
Was dining out a part of your heritage?
No, not much.
No.
But my brother went into the restaurant business before me. I've got a brother who's 3 years older, who's just retired these days, but he's still got one wine bar in London. But he has been in the business for a very long time. So he went in before me, so he used to take me to restaurants. But we did used to go to the local Greasy Spoon, where I think I always had mixed grill because it was the biggest dish on the menu, and then tended to cover it with a tomato sauce of a definitely commercial nature, shall we say.
Do you remember back in your early days, perhaps in your teens, when you were just sort of learning to cook with your family members? I mean, do you remember being particularly good or particularly bad at it? I mean,
I don't think that I was either of those, to be honest. I think the only time, and look, most people would say now, it's when I left home and moved into a flat that I actually then started cooking. And I also was a musician when I first left school, because my mother was a very successful folk singer. And I'm not saying I had any talent whatsoever, because I will agree that I didn't. Lack of talent won out, I always talk about.
Yeah.
But the point is I then started working as a dishwasher in restaurants to keep body and soul together. And I was very lucky because I discovered another thing that I loved. And you know, that's what's so hard about kids these days. They leave school and they don't know what to do because they can't get a job in something. I was lucky. I had two things that I loved. one that I happened to be quite good at.
When did you actually decide that this was going to be your career?
About 18 or 19.
Right.
And I don't know whether I actually said this is going to be my career, but I was enjoying it, and I decided to retire from my life of fame as a guitarist.
You're not going to escape easily without asking about the music career. Everybody always asks.
I thought we'd finish that.
Come on, how bad was it?
Well, we won 2 battles of the band in the days when they were like the Hoadleys ones, which they were quite good. But I was always, I'm not saying I had the ability to be a perfectionist, but I always felt that if I was going to do it, I had to be very good at it.
Yep.
And Clapton I wasn't, mate. I can tell you that very easily. And in fact, I mean, the New Zealand bands like the La-Di-Dahs and Larry's Rebels and things like that, I wasn't in their kind of league as a guitarist, so I retired.
I imagine being a musician a little bit like being a chef or a cook. You've got to love it. You've got to have a passion for it. And if you're going to do it as a career, just like being a chef, you've got to love food, and you've got to love music. And,
absolutely, you have to be good at it too. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're no good at it, get out, go and do something else.
What brought you to Australia?
I was working in restaurants in Wellington, and dare I say it, apart from a place called the Coachman, which was very good. That's where my brother worked, and I worked there for a little bit. Apart from that, there wasn't a restaurant in New Zealand that you would rate highly, and I had got interested. And so I came to Australia, moved to Melbourne, because in those days Melbourne was the restaurant capital. And I was going to go to Canada. Don't ask me why. I had this mad idea I was going to Canada, and 35 years later I'm still here. So I haven't quite made it to Canada yet.
So in those days, Ian, not to date you too much, but we didn't have quite as much, I guess, selection as we do now in terms of restaurants. I mean, there's a restaurant in every corner, but in those days,
still had some good restaurants. I mean, like from Melbourne's point of view, and I didn't come up to Brisbane until much later in my stay here. But Melbourne had two faces. It had Fanny's. It had, quite a few really good ones. But once you moved out of the CBD, you were in real trouble. And I'm talking about really genuinely, the main suburbs around the CBD, you're in trouble. Now, I travel a lot these days, and I would almost deny anyone not to be able to find a good meal in any country town in Australia. And, good local produce. I always remember going to a place called Kuirup when I first arrived here, which was an asparagus growing region, and watching the trucks go past with the asparagus on it. And so I ordered asparagus soup, as you would. And it comes out, and I've got this greasy, sort of creamy bowl of things, and I couldn't taste any asparagus. So I said to the waitress, look, I'm sorry, but I've got a bit of a problem here. I can't, taste any asparagus. And she took it back, and she came back, and she said, the chef forgot to put the asparagus. I now had 4 spears of canned asparagus. I'm watching the trucks go past. The fields are over the road. I mean, those were the days.
Yeah.
And I've been here long enough to see this amazing change. Now, you'd have to remember, and I'm not putting Queensland down, but there was always the jokes about Queensland. How did you find the steak? I moved the fruit salad, and there it was. So I mean, when you have a look at some of these amazing restaurants that are happening here with the beautiful local fish, those days, that you'd say to them, do you have fresh fish? They'd say, oh yes, fresh frozen.
Exactly.
So what a change, isn't it? And it's wonderful to be part of it.
And that's happened right across Australia, hasn't it?
Yes,
I mean,
very much so.
You mentioned country towns. I mean, every country town used to have the one Chinese restaurant and perhaps some sort of bistro. And nowadays, as you say, you can get good food everywhere.
Yeah, sometimes there is a little shame. Look, I quite miss some of those old pubs that used to the wonderful mixed grills and the steak that hung over either end, and I'm sure there's some of them left, but they have become a bit trendified for me. I like some plain food at times, and I mean, the quality of their ingredients are still good, but I just, every now and then, I wouldn't mind a mixed grill, as long as the ingredients were terrific.
We're going to talk about trendy food soon. What's it like for Iain Hewitson when he goes to a restaurant? It must be a daunting experience for the people that are serving the food and cooking the food.
Oh, look, I don't think so. Basically, I'm a daytime cook, and I'm pretty laid back and pretty easygoing. I could understand if Jamie or Gordon or somebody walked in, I could understand them getting upset.
Especially Gordon.
Well, we won't go on about that. But you could understand that. But me, I do a daytime show, and I am what you get. I'm not an actor. I'm just this laid back guy, and so I don't think it's a daunting experience. I mean, I think I'm sort of small potatoes when it comes to that. So I just, go and mainly have good food, which is important. But I can get a booking.
Exactly. That's right. That is an advantage. Table for two. What's the name? Hewitson. How did you develop your style? How did you work out what was good and what was bad?
I think the thing about it is that I had no professional training. And when you look around, quite a lot of, the chefs like Stephanie and myself, and, I'm just naming 2, but a heck of a lot, didn't have professional training. And the reason, because the schools weren't of the standard they are now.
Yeah.
So I, along with these people, devoured books. I ate out a huge amount. It was funny in the off season around Christmas and things, off season here, you know, in the days when January wasn't a great month, you'd go to France and you'd find yourself sitting in a room populated by Australian restaurateurs. And I think the thing about it is we soaked up a lot of ideas just like a sponge, because we really didn't have a cuisine. And we didn't have a heck of a lot of ideas. And yeah, sure, we went through the Nouvelle cuisine, we went through all that. But it's funny, and I think wine lovers would appreciate what I'm saying, is you start off liking sweet wine, and then you progress and you decide, oh, I hate sweet wine. Admittedly, it's slightly different sweet wine. And you progress and you don't like them. Then when you get to the peak, you suddenly rediscover Sauternes and the various, you know, dessert wines. Food's the same. You start off liking very simple food. Then you go through this fancy pants era that everything has to have 93 ingredients and, you know, it has to be piled high and all that. And then when you reach the pinnacle, you sort of realize that I actually like the raw ingredient to be the prime ingredient on my plate. I like, yes, the ingredient has to be very good. It has to be bought well and it has to be cooked well. But the thing is, I like simple food. Well, that's exactly what's happened with me. I prefer simple food to really fancy pants stuff. And that's what I cook. So I've gone back to the days, and it's governed by the show, I have to be honest.
Yep.
But even I've got a bar in Melbourne these days. Even that does simple food. It does stews and braises and slow-cooked shoulders of lamb and things like that. And that's the food that I personally prefer, I have to be honest.
When you're in your young days, it must take a fair amount of confidence to put together meals for other people, and obviously there would be a rejection when you're starting out and you're learning, and especially when you're first restauranting days.
Absolutely.
And you've got to, I suppose, leave the ego, I suppose, at the door a little bit, and you're putting these products out there, and I guess sometimes they would be rejected.
Well, I think the thing about it is that my first restaurant in Australia was in the early 70s, and you know, I've had about 13 or 15. I mean, these days I'm certainly not a restaurateur.
Yep.
I run a bar along with a couple of partners because I spend far too much time away to be trying to cook. But I think there is a thing called the arrogance of youth.
Yes.
And you think you're doing everything right.
Yeah.
And when I look back at it now and I look at some of those dishes, and sure, you know, some were rejected, of course, but you learnt along with your customers. We grew. You know, the customers were starting to travel a lot more. They were getting interested, and you learnt along with them. But I think you're pretty arrogant when you're young. You don't think that you can do anything wrong. So I look back at some of those dishes and I thought, my God, if somebody served on those now, I'd you know, go and push it in their face. No, I wouldn't, because I'm not a bad-tempered man.
Yeah, very happy to forget some of those, I can imagine. We're all like that. I mean, radio, TV's the same. You look back and you're 10 years and you think, oh no.
Yeah, I saw my screen test for Healthy, Wealthy and Wise, you know, a few years ago. How I got hired, I thought I was really funny and witty and entertaining. I thought I was doing really well. And I saw it and I thought, well, I don't know how these guys saw something in me. I think maybe that everyone else was worse. So they took the least bad one of the bunch.
Maybe they saw potential in. That's a bit that way.
We'll say that. The arrogance of youth, they saw potential.